On the distant planet of Erithos, there was a tale that had been passed down through countless generations. It was a tale that spoke of an ancient sword, forged long before any of the current species had ever walked the planet. This sword was unlike any other weapon known to the beings of Erithos. It was said to be a symbol of power, a relic of the ancient civilization that once ruled the world. However, there was one thing that made this sword different from all the others. No one, not a single alien, had ever been able to lift it. The sword lay in the heart of the Grand Temple, surrounded by towering stone pillars and walls etched with symbols of long-lost languages. It rested on a pedestal in the center, its blade glowing faintly with a mysterious light. Over the centuries, many had come to see the sword, drawn by the legend that surrounded it. Some believed it held untold power, while others thought it was merely a relic of the past, its importance lost to time. But the one thing that everyone agreed on was that the sword could not be lifted. Many different species had come to the temple, each eager to prove their worth and to try their hand at lifting the sword. Strong, towering beings with muscles that rippled under their skin, quick and nimble creatures with limbs built for speed, and even those with advanced technology, all attempted to lift the sword. But each time, they failed. The sword remained firmly in place, as if mocking their efforts. The aliens who lived on Erithos came to see the sword as a test. It was said that only one who was truly worthy could lift it, but no one knew what it meant to be worthy. Perhaps it was strength, or wisdom, or something else entirely. Over time, the tale of the sword became a part of the planet's history, told to every youngling, passed from generation to generation, and inspiring both hope and despair in equal measure. But as the years went on, the sword became more than just a legend. It became a symbol of impossibility, a reminder of how little was truly understood about the ancient civilization that had once ruled the planet. It was said that the ancients had left behind knowledge and power beyond comprehension, but all of it was locked away with the sword, waiting for someone worthy to unlock its secrets. The current species on Erithos, a collection of different alien races, no longer attempted to lift the sword. They knew better than to challenge it. Instead, they visited the temple in reverence, as if the sword itself was a silent guardian of the past, holding secrets that were never meant to be uncovered. The temple became a place of pilgrimage, where the aliens would go to pay their respects and remember their ancient ancestors. Then, one day, a human arrived on Erithos. The humans were a rare sight in the galaxy. While they had been making strides in space exploration, they were still considered newcomers in the grand scheme of the universe. No human had ever set foot on Erithos before, and their arrival stirred curiosity among the alien species. Alex, the human representative, had been sent to Erithos as part of a diplomatic mission. His task was simple: to open peaceful relations between his people and the various species on the planet. Alex had heard of the legendary sword before his arrival. It was a story that had captivated his imagination. But as a human, he was skeptical. He believed that such legends were often exaggerated, stories made up to explain the unexplainable. He had seen his fair share of old myths during his travels, but never had he come across one as bizarre as this. When Alex arrived at the temple, he was met with awe from the alien leaders. They had heard about the human who was supposed to bring peace to their world, but they had not expected him to be so different. He was small compared to them, and his appearance was unlike anything they had ever seen. But there was something in his eyes, something that intrigued them as he walked through the ancient temple. His footsteps echoing off the stone walls, Alex couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder. The place was unlike anything he had ever seen. The walls were adorned with intricate carvings that told stories of a civilization long gone. The air was thick with mystery, and the atmosphere seemed to hum with the energy of the past. When he finally reached the heart of the temple, his gaze fell upon the sword. He stood there for a moment, taking in its beauty. The blade shimmered faintly, as if it were alive, calling to him. Alex felt an odd pull toward it, but he dismissed it as nothing more than a trick of the mind. The leader of the alien species, a tall being with translucent skin and glowing eyes, approached Alex. "It is said that no one can lift the sword," the leader said. But perhaps you, human, will be the one to prove us wrong. Alex raised an eyebrow, his skepticism still present. You want me to try? The leader nodded. It is tradition. Only those who are worthy can lift the sword. Alex smiled, thinking it was all just a part of the alien culture, a test that didn't mean anything. All right, he said. I'll give it a try. With that, Alex stepped forward and reached out for the sword. As his fingers brushed the hilt, he felt a strange sensation. It was as though the sword was alive, responding to his touch. For a brief moment, he thought he could feel the power of the ancients surging through him, but as he gripped the sword, it didn't move. Alex chuckled, shaking his head. I guess the legend's true after all. But little did he know, the sword had just begun to stir, and the legend of the sword was far from over. The temple, a place of both wonder and ancient power, echoed with silence as Alex stood before the sword. The aliens, though peaceful in demeanor, watched him with keen eyes, their curiosity growing. To them, the sword was a sacred relic, a test, not just of strength, but of something deeper, something beyond the understanding of the living beings on Erithos. The leader, who had introduced himself as Talanir, observed Alex carefully, his translucent skin glowing softly in the dim light of the temple. Talanir was tall, with features that seemed almost ethereal, like something crafted from the stars themselves. His voice was calm, but carried a weight that commanded attention. Human, Talanir spoke, his tone low yet filled with meaning. The legend of the sword is not one of mere fantasy. It has been a truth, passed down by our ancestors, that no one can lift the sword, no one, until now. Perhaps it is your presence here that has brought this moment. Perhaps you are the one the sword has been waiting for. Alex raised an eyebrow. Wait a minute, you mean to say that you all believe? This sword chooses who can lift it. Talanir's eyes flickered, and he nodded slowly. It's not just strength, but the essence of the being. The sword knows who is worthy, and only they can unlock its true power. The rest of us, ... We are not worthy, but you, human, ... Alex frowned, still uncertain. And you want me to try lifting it? To what end? Talanir's voice took on a more earnest note. It is an invitation, Alex. A challenge, but also a gift. The sword was made to find a protector, someone who could wield its power for centuries. It has waited, and now it calls to you. We offer you this chance, but we also warn you it is not a simple task. Should you fail, the sword will remain locked, but if you succeed... A wave of anticipation passed through the gathered aliens. The air seemed to grow heavier, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Alex, despite his doubts, could feel the weight of something extraordinary in the air. His hand hovered near the sword, but something deep inside him hesitated. What happens if I succeed? Alex asked, his voice quieter now, sensing the gravity of the situation. Talanir paused, his eyes reflecting a deep sadness. If you succeed, the sword will recognize you as its true bearer. You will inherit the knowledge of the ancients, the power to protect this planet and its secrets. But with that power comes great responsibility. The weight of the past will become yours to carry, and your destiny will be forever tied to Erithos. Alex glanced at the sword once more. It was as if he could feel its call now, pulling at him from within the ancient temple. He had always believed in diplomacy, in solving things with words, not force. Yet, standing here, he knew this was not about words. This was something far beyond anything he had ever encountered. A test not just of strength, but of fate. Alex was no stranger. 2 challenges, but this was different. This wasn't just a diplomatic mission anymore. It was a trial, one that could change the course of history. I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of responsibility, Alex muttered, his gaze shifting from the sword to the watching aliens. Talanir stepped closer, his gaze softening. No one is ever truly ready, Alex. It is not the readiness that matters. It is the courage to face the unknown. Will you take this step forward? Aliens around them, silent until now, watched with anticipation. Alex felt their eyes on him, waiting. He looked down at the sword once again, its gleaming blade almost calling to him. Could feel something ancient stirring within it, a force that could reshape everything. His heart raced. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. Yet there was something else, something deep within him that sparked. Maybe it was the human spirit, the unyielding drive to rise to any challenge, to conquer the impossible. "I'm not sure what will happen," Alex said, taking a step toward the sword, "but I'll try." As he extended his hand toward the hilt, something changed. The atmosphere around him grew still, as if the planet itself was waiting. His fingers brushed against the cold metal, and in that instant he felt a connection. It wasn't just the sword. He felt as though something inside him had awoken, something tied to the very fabric of the planet. The whispers among the aliens grew louder. Some looked on with hope, others with disbelief. The impossible was about to unfold, and no one knew how it would end. Alex gripped the sword. At first, nothing happened. The sword remained unmoved. But as Alex concentrated, focusing all his energy on lifting it, something stirred. A faint tremor ran through the sword, and then, just for a moment, it seemed to respond. The room held its breath. Would this be the moment the legend was shattered? Would a human be the one to lift the ancient sword? Only time would tell. But in that instant, Alex felt the weight of history on his shoulders. The challenge had begun. The air in the temple was thick with anticipation. Every eye locked on Alex as he stood, sword in hand, the weight of its ancient power pulling at him in ways he couldn't fully understand. The hushed murmurs of the gathered aliens filled the silence like a soft, uneasy hum. To them, this was not just a test of strength. It was a moment that would either shatter or confirm their centuries-old beliefs. Alex's grip tightened around the hilt of the sword, the cool metal sending a ripple of energy through his veins. His heart raced, but his mind was calm. He'd always faced challenges head-on, believing that every situation had a solution. But this was different. This was a test that went beyond logic, beyond reason. This was a trial of destiny. The first few attempts were awkward. His hands fumbled against the smooth surface of the hilt, and for a moment the sword remained completely still. The crowd's eyes narrowed with growing skepticism, and Alex felt the weight of their judgment. Their centuries-old tradition hanging in the air like a cloud. "I knew it," he thought to himself. "There's no way I can lift this. Just a myth, a legend, a story made to keep us in awe of something that isn't real." But as he stood there, the sword beneath his hand seemed to hum a strange, quiet hum that reverberated through the tips of his fingers. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there. And in that moment, Alex realized something. This was no ordinary relic. There was a pulse, a presence to the sword that was unlike anything he had ever felt. His grip adjusted slightly, more out of instinct than conscious thought. The metal felt warmer, as though it was responding to him, as though it knew him. Room fell silent, watching intently as Alex tried once more, with his shoulders tense and his brow furrowed in concentration. Alex planted his feet firmly against the cold stone floor. He focused everything on the sword, pushing away his doubt, his frustration. His fingers curled tighter, and this time when he pulled, there was resistance, but not the kind of resistance he expected. For a brief moment, the sword shifted. It was barely perceptible, a flicker of movement, like a faint tremor in the ground beneath his feet, but it was enough to make the entire room hold its breath. The blade had moved. The whispers spread quickly among the aliens. Some gasped, others stared in wide-eyed disbelief. Never in the history of Arythos had any being, human or alien, managed to move the sword. Yet here was Alex, a stranger, a human, who had already done what they thought was impossible. But Alex himself was uncertain. He had felt the movement, but it was so small, so fleeting, that he wasn't sure it had even happened at all. Could it have been his imagination? Had he just made an unconscious adjustment? He paused, looking at the sword in his hands, still feeling its warmth. The sword was silent, unmoving again, as though it was waiting for something, perhaps for him to realize that it wasn't just about muscle or force. The leader, Talonir, stepped forward, his ethereal features sharp with intrigue. "Did you feel it?" he asked softly, his voice laced with both wonder and disbelief. Alex looked at him, sweat beading on his brow. "I don't know," he said honestly. "It moved, ... or maybe it didn't. But it felt like something." Talanir's gaze remained steady. "That is more than anyone has ever felt, Alex. It is said that the sword knows who it will allow to lift it. Perhaps the question is no longer whether you can lift it, but why it allowed you to move it at all." The room was filled with a palpable energy, the gravity of the situation settling on Alex like a weight he couldn't shake. He had done something that no one else had ever done before. But why? As the minutes ticked by, the sword remained still in his hands, its cold surface almost mocking him now. The aliens around him shifted uneasily, their minds grappling with the impossible. What had just happened? Was Alex truly the one destined to unlock the sword's power? For a moment, Alex considered giving up. The doubt crept back in what if? This was all a mistake? What if he wasn't the one after all? But then he looked around the temple, at the ancient faces of the aliens who had once believed this sword could never be moved. He thought of how they had stared at him, eyes full of hope and skepticism, waiting for him to either succeed or fail. He couldn't quit now. Alex took a deep breath, his chest rising with the determination to prove the impossible was within his grasp. He set his jaw, his mind clear now, pushing away every negative thought. He focused once more on the sword, this time more attuned to its presence than ever before. He wasn't just pulling with his hands now. He was pulling with everything he had, his will, his courage, his desire to prove that the impossible could always be overcome. The sword vibrated in his hands, a low, almost inaudible hum that grew stronger. His heart pounded, each beat synchronized. With the pulse of the ancient relic, the room was still, the aliens watching with bated breath. And then, with a sudden jolt, the sword moved again, this time, a little more. It didn't fly into the air, but it shifted enough to send a surge of energy coursing through Alex's body, making him gasp. The alien stood frozen. This was not just a test of strength, it was something far more than that. Something was happening. Here. Something that none of them had ever expected. Alex had not only moved the sword, he had made the impossible seem possible. But the question now lingered in the air. Was this just the beginning? Or was there more to come, something far more dangerous and life-altering than he could ever imagine? The temple was silent, save for the faint echo of Alex's breath. The sword, once still and unyielding, now hummed softly in his grasp, as though alive. A quiet pulse vibrated through his fingers, sending waves of heat coursing up his arms. For a brief moment, it felt as though time itself had slowed down, the weight of the moment pressing on Alex from all sides. The very air around him seemed to hum with ancient energy, as the sword trembled slightly in his hands. Alex felt a connection and an inexplicable bond that transcended mere physical force. It wasn't just the power of the sword, it was something much deeper, something far beyond what any alien or human had ever known. It was as though the sword had recognized something in him. The whispers of the aliens in the room grew louder, filled with astonishment. "Oh, no one has ever come this close," one muttered, his voice trembling. "He's doing it. He's actually doing it." For Alex, it wasn't the praise that mattered. It was the strange, overwhelming sensation coursing through him. His body felt lighter, almost weightless, as if the sword was somehow pulling the very essence of his being into alignment with something greater. The power of the sword wasn't just a physical force, it was a presence. An ancient consciousness that had been dormant for millennia, waiting for someone worthy to awaken it. Alex's head spun. His heart raced. The sword was beginning to communicate. With him, not through words, but through feelings and sensations that rippled across his mind like waves on the surface of a deep, dark ocean. The knowledge of ages secrets of the ancients, civilizations lost to time poured into him, overwhelming and awe-inspiring. But it wasn't just knowledge that the sword imparted. It was a flood of emotion, a surge of power that coursed through him like fire. Alex's muscles tensed, as the energy from the sword seemed to burn its way into every fiber of his being. He felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, as if the sword had chosen him not just to wield it, but to protect the very planet that had borne it. This wasn't just about lifting an object, it was about becoming a part of something far bigger than himself. The sensation was intoxicating, but it was also terrifying. Alex could feel the ancient power surging within him, threatening to overwhelm him. His mind raced with the implications of what was happening. He wasn't just holding a weapon, he was unlocking something that had been sealed away for eons. The sword had chosen him, but the question was, could he handle what came next? His hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the sheer magnitude of what was happening. The sword pulsed in his grip, as though it was testing him, waiting to see if he could withstand the power it offered. Talanir, who had been watching in awe, stepped forward, his voice barely a whisper. "Do you feel it, Alex? The sword is not just a relic. It is a gateway, a conduit to the power of the ancients. But it is not something that can be taken lightly. It will consume you if you are not careful." Alex nodded, his throat dry. He could feel it, the power coursing through him like a storm trapped inside a fragile vessel. Every instinct told him to let go, to release the sword and step away, but something in him refused. It was as though the sword and he had become one. To let go now would be to abandon the connection they had forged. The temperature in the room rose. The sword began to glow with an intense, otherworldly light. It was as though the entire temple had come alive, reacting to the energy that now flowed freely through the air. The ground beneath Alex's feet trembled, and the very walls of the temple seemed to pulse with an ancient, forgotten rhythm. Alex's body buckled under the weight of the power flooding him. He gasped for breath, struggling to maintain his grip. On the sword, the knowledge of the ancients, the weight of the responsibility, and the raw power of the sword were threatening to tear him apart. The energy that coursed through him wasn't just a gift, it was a trial, test to see if he was truly worthy of what lay ahead. His vision blurred as the power surged higher. For a split second, Alex thought he might lose control. He could feel the sword pulling at him, testing his will, testing his strength. It wasn't just about physical strength anymore. The sword was testing his resolve, his courage, his very essence. Would he succumb to the power, or would he stand firm and embrace the destiny that was unfolding before him? Then, just as suddenly as it began, the overwhelming surge of energy stopped. Alex stumbled back, the sword slipping from his hands as the room returned to its stillness. His breath came in ragged gasps, his heart pounding in his chest. The power that had surged through him seemed to fade, but its imprint remained burned into his very soul. The aliens around him were silent, their eyes wide with awe. Talanir approached cautiously, his gaze fixed on Alex. "The sword has chosen you. Alex, it has recognized something within you that has remained hidden for so long. You are now the bearer of its power, the guardian of its secrets." Alex's legs buckled, and he sank to his knees, overwhelmed by the enormity of what had just occurred. His mind raced, trying to process everything that had just happened. The sword, the power, the responsibility was all too much. But beneath the fear and confusion, there was something else, something deep within him that resonated with the power of the sword. A flicker of understanding, sense of purpose. The sword had not only chosen him, it had awakened something inside of him, something that would shape the course of his future and the future of Erithos. The question now was not whether he could control the power, it was whether he could accept the role he had been thrust into. The power of the ancients was his to wield, but it came with a cost. And as Alex gazed at the glowing sword, he realized that he had just begun the journey of a lifetime, one that would forever change the fate of this alien planet and perhaps the entire galaxy. The air in the temple had grown thick with tension, the pulse of the sword still lingering in the room like a distant echo. Alex sat on the stone floor, his back against the cold wall, trying to regain some semblance of control over the overwhelming force that had surged through him. Power, he had felt it, was like nothing he had ever experienced before. A flood of knowledge, a surge of energy, an ancient presence all crashing into his being at once. His breathing slowed, his chest rising, and falling with each labored inhale. The aliens in the room had remained silent, watching him with a mixture of awe, fear, and respect. Talanir, ever the leader, had stepped back, allowing Alex to gather himself. No one dared to interrupt. The room was as still as the planet itself. As though it too was waiting for what would come next, Alex could feel the weight of the sword's power deep within him. It wasn't just an artifact. It was something far more ancient, far more alive than he had ever imagined. But with that realization came an undeniable truth. He had barely scratched the surface of what it could do. And whatever he had tapped into, whatever power had awakened inside of him, was still there, dormant but waiting. After a long, suffocating silence, Talanir's voice broke through. "The sword has tested you, Alex, but this is only the beginning. You have felt its power, but you have not yet lifted it. The true trial lies ahead." Alex's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. "You mean to say I have to try again?" His voice was hoarse, still trembling from the intensity of what he had just experienced. Talanir nodded solemnly. "The sword does not give its power freely. It tests the strength, the will, the heart of the one who seeks to wield it. You must prove that you are more than just a vessel. The sword will not serve someone who is uncertain. It will only serve the one who is steadfast." Alex stood shakily, his legs unsteady beneath him. The room seemed to sway, the air still heavy with the energy that had once threatened to consume him. His mind was clouded, but his heart burned with an unshakable desire to prove that he could control it, that he could stand up to whatever challenge lay ahead. He wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. "I'm not giving up," he said firmly, his voice more steady than he felt. "Let's do this." The aliens watched him closely, but their expressions were filled with uncertainty. None of them had ever seen anyone human or alien push forward after the sword had already rejected them. But something about Alex's resolve was different. It was as though the sword had recognized that spark in him, even if it had not fully accepted him yet. Alex stepped forward once more. His eyes locked on the hilt of the sword. The blade, now glowing faintly, almost seemed to mock him, its ancient power still very much in control. The temple's stone walls seemed to shift with each of his movements, the faint hum of energy pulsating in the air. He reached out slowly as though touching the sword would trigger another surge of power. The moment his fingers brushed the hilt, again the sword trembled, but this time it felt different. This time the connection was not just an explosion of energy, it was a quiet, deliberate hum, like the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to prove his worth. Alex gripped the sword more firmly, and immediately the power surged again. But this time it was different. The rush was not as overwhelming. He could feel the energy, feel its pulse, but this time it didn't burn through him. It wasn't attempting to consume him, it was inviting him to harness it, to claim it as his own. A deep, resonant voice echoed in his mind, not one he could hear with his ears, but one that felt as though it came from the very core of the planet. "You are not yet worthy, but you are close. Prove your heart. Prove your strength." Alex's fingers tightened around the sword. This was not about muscle. It wasn't about raw power. It was about control, about showing that he could wield the sword without being consumed by it. The power was still there, but now it felt tame, waiting. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, focusing on the sword, on the connection between them. The world around him faded into nothingness. It was just him and the sword, a symbol of the past and the future entwined in a fragile balance. He wasn't sure what the sword had seen in him, what had made it stir in the first place, but he knew this. He couldn't back down now. With every ounce of willpower he had left, Alex pulled. The sword shifted again this time. It was more than just a tremor. The blade moved with purpose, lifting ever so slightly from its pedestal. The room seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, Alex thought he had failed again. But then the sword gave another tremor, and this time it was undeniable. It was lifting. Slowly, but steadily. The power surged through him once more, but this time it was different. This time Alex was ready for it. He steadied his stance, bracing against the wave of energy that threatened to overwhelm him. He could feel the ancient knowledge filling his mind, the responsibility of wielding the sword pressing against his chest. He wasn't just a bystander in this moment. He was the one who had chosen to face the sword, and the sword was now choosing him. The sword finally lifted completely, the blade gleaming in the light. Alex's arms shook with the effort, but he stood firm, holding it aloft. The temple was still. The aliens stood in awe, their disbelief now replaced by reverence. They had witnessed something they thought was impossible. The human, the outsider, had done what none of them had ever managed to do. For the first time, Alex felt the weight of the sword's power not as a burden, but as a connection. The energy that had once threatened to consume him was now something he could harness. It was his to wield, his to control. Talanir stepped forward, his eyes wide with astonishment. "You have done what no one else could," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You have proven yourself worthy. The sword has chosen you." Alex looked at the glowing blade in his hands, and for the first time he felt the true weight of his journey. The path ahead was uncertain, and the power of the sword came with its own dangers. But one thing was clear: this was just the beginning. He would be ready for whatever came next. The room was still, and for a moment it felt as if the entire temple itself was holding its breath. Alex stood with the sword raised high above his head, its blade shimmering with a soft ethereal glow, casting faint shadows across the stone walls. The air hummed with the energy of the ancient relic, and Alex felt it deep within him, more than just the power of the sword. There was something else, something beneath the surface of everything that had happened, something waiting to be discovered. Talanir, the leader of the Alien Council, stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Alex. His voice, though calm, carried an undercurrent of awe that seemed to reverberate through the very walls of the temple. "You have proven yourself worthy, Alex, but what you have unlocked is more than just the sword's power. What you hold now is the key to something far greater than you can imagine." Alex's brow furrowed, his grip tightening on the sword, as if bracing himself for what was to come. "What do you mean? I don't understand." Talanir's eyes softened, and he gestured for the others to gather around. The rest of the alien species in the room, who had watched with silent disbelief. As Alex lifted the sword, now stood in quiet reverence, their expressions a mixture of awe and curiosity. "The sword you hold," Talanir began, his voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom, "is not just a weapon of power. It is a conduit, a link to the lost civilization that once thrived on this planet, the civilization that built this temple, that forged the sword. It was they who left behind the knowledge of the ancients, the knowledge that has remained hidden for millennia." Alex felt a chill run down his spine. He had thought the sword was simply a weapon, a relic of a long-dead age. But now, Talanir was suggesting something far more profound. This was no ordinary object. It was a doorway to something far beyond mere power. "What knowledge?" Alex asked, his voice steady despite the growing sense of unease creeping into his chest. "What happened to the civilization that built this? Why is it all gone?" Talanir's gaze turned distant, as though the memories of the past were resurfacing before him. The civilization that built this temple was powerful. Perhaps the most advanced the galaxy has ever known. They harnessed forces that no one else could even comprehend, powers that transcended physical strength and technology. But in their quest for ultimate power, they did something that shattered the very fabric of reality. The room seemed to grow darker as the weight of Talanir's words settled in. The sword in Alex's hand pulsed softly, almost in response to the gravity of the story being told. They tried to control the very essence of life and death itself. Talanir continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. They sought immortality, to bind their consciousness to the planet, to merge their minds with the very soul of Arythos. But the power they wielded was too much. The planet, the sword, it rejected them. Alex's mind raced, trying to process what he was hearing. Immortality? Binding consciousness to a planet? It sounded like the stuff of legend. It here was. Talanir, an ancient being who had lived through it all, was telling him that such powers existed, powers that had led to the downfall of an entire civilization. They failed, Talanir said, his voice filled with both sorrow and caution. The planet itself responded to their greed. Arythos is no longer what it once was. The consciousness of the ancients was torn apart, scattered across the planet. What remains is a shadow of what it was, a world left to heal, to recover from the damage done by its former rulers. The sword was sealed away, hidden in this temple, waiting for someone who could understand its power and purpose. Lex stood, frozen, the weight of Talanir's words crashing over him like a tidal wave. The sword, the power he now wielded it, was all tied to the ancient failure of a civilization that had tried to do the impossible. And now, for reasons he couldn't yet comprehend, he had been chosen to bear that power. But why me? Alex asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Why did it choose me? I'm just a human. I don't understand any of this. Talanir's eyes met his, and for the first time, Alex saw something other than awe or reverence in the leader's gaze. It was understanding, compassion, a recognition that Alex, despite his doubts, had been chosen for a reason. The sword does not choose randomly, Talanir said softly. It chooses those who can withstand its power, those who can learn from the mistakes of the past. The ancients were consumed by their desire for control, and in doing so, they lost everything. You, Alex, have the chance to do what they could not, to wield this power with humility, with respect for the balance of the universe. Alex's grip on the sword tightened. The weight of the responsibility pressed heavily on him now. This wasn't just about lifting a sword or proving himself to the aliens. This was about something far greater, about preventing the same mistakes that had led to the fall of an entire civilization. It was about safeguarding a power that could either heal or destroy. But as the revelation settled in, another thought gnawed at the back of his mind. The sword had chosen him, yes, but was he truly ready to carry such a burden? The ancients had failed because they had sought immortality, control over life and death itself. Could Alex avoid their fate? Could he wield this power without becoming consumed by it? Before he could voice his doubts, Talanir spoke again, his tone heavy with forewarning. The sword, as powerful as it is not just a weapon, it is a test. It will show you the path, but it will not lead you down it. Is your choice, Alex? And you must be ready, for once you embrace its power fully, there is no turning back. The sword will call you to face the very heart of Arythos, and what you find there will determine not just your fate, but the fate of all who live on this planet. Alex's mind reeled, and yet, amid the overwhelming uncertainty, one thought remained clear. The sword had chosen him. And with it came a purpose, a responsibility far greater than anything he had ever known. As he looked down at the blade in his hands, the faint glow of the sword seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. It was no longer just an object, it was part of him now. And with that realization, Alex knew one thing for certain. The journey ahead would be unlike anything he had ever faced. The chamber was silent, save for the soft hum of the sword in Alex's hand. The weight of everything Talanir had shared with him pressed on his shoulders like a mountain. The power of the ancients, the sword's immense potential, the responsibility of wielding it all, of it had come crashing down on him. His mind raced, torn between the overwhelming desire to understand it all and the deep fear of what it might cost him. The sword pulsed softly, almost like a heartbeat, in his grip. It was no longer just an object. It had become a part of him. It wasn't merely waiting for someone to lift it. It was waiting for someone to truly understand it, to use its power for more than just personal gain, to use it to balance what had been lost and to prevent the same destructive path that had led to the fall of the ancients. Talanir's words echoed in Alex's mind. The sword will show you the path, but it will not lead you down it. That is your choice. A sense of finality settled in the air. Alex could feel it deep within him. The sword had already tested him, had already shown him a glimpse of its power, but now it was asking him to make the hardest decision of all. Would he embrace this power, knowing what it could do, or would he let it go, understanding the danger it could bring if misused? Alex Talanir's voice was soft, but filled with an urgency that Alex had not heard before. The sword has shown you a fraction of what it can do. Simply about power. It is about wisdom, about humility. It's about not becoming like the ancients. Alex turned slowly, his gaze fixed on the leader. His mind was a swirl of conflicting thoughts. How can I possibly be the one to wield this power? He had come here as a diplomat, a human who never imagined his journey would lead him to this moment, to a decision that could change the fate of not just the planet, but possibly the entire galaxy. Talonir's sighs softened, and for a moment, he looked almost human. It will not be easy. The sword will show you visions, Alex. It will tempt. You, with the power it can grant, with the immortality it once promised to the ancients. But you must understand those who sought to control it, to bind themselves to its power, lost everything in the end. Their minds shattered, their souls torn apart by their own desires. Alex closed his eyes, the weight of Talonir's words sinking into his heart. The sword was more than just an artifact. It was a reflection of the deepest desires and fears of those who wielded it. And now it was calling to him. It was asking him to take on the mantle of responsibility, to be the one who would ensure that such a tragedy never happened again. He could feel the sword's presence within him, its energy still swirling beneath the surface. It wasn't just power, it was a force that could shape realities, change destinies, and rewrite the very fabric of the universe. The sword held the knowledge of the ancients, the answers to questions no one had dared to ask for centuries. It could heal, it could protect. And yet, in the wrong hands, it could destroy everything. Alex opened his eyes, his heart beating heavily in his chest. The final choice was his to make.
What?
Could he trust himself with this power? Could he resist the temptation to wield it for personal gain, to fix everything that was wrong in the world, no matter the cost? He looked down at the sword, its gleaming surface reflecting the light of the temple. It was calling to him, urging him to embrace it fully. But there was a part of him, a small voice deep within, that whispered a warning. Do not be consumed by it. Do not become what they became. Alex exhaled sharply, his grip tightening on the hilt. It was true, the sword had tested him, and it would continue to test him. But the real test was whether he could accept the responsibility that came with it. The sword was not just a gift, it was a burden, a challenge to his very soul. He turned to face Talonir, who stood silently, waiting. The alien leader had seen it all, had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the endless cycles of power and destruction. And now, he was placing his trust in Alex. I don't know if I'm ready, Alex said quietly, his voice trembling with uncertainty. Talonir stepped forward, his eyes filled with understanding. None of us are ever truly ready for such power, Alex. But it is not about being ready, it is about choice. The sword will reveal to you the path you choose, but the consequences of that choice will be yours to bear. The ancients failed because they were consumed by their desire to control. They believed they could shape the universe to their will, but the universe cannot be controlled. It must be respected. Alex took a deep breath. His eyes flickered. To the sword once more, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He thought of the ancients, of their hubris, and how it had led them to ruin. And he thought of the aliens around him, the species who had once revered the sword, who had witnessed its power and failed to understand it. He knew now that he couldn't let history repeat itself. He had been given the power, but it was up to him to decide how it would be used. With a steady hand, Alex lowered the sword, the blade still glowing faintly with an ancient light. He met Talonir's gaze, his resolve solidifying within him. I choose to protect, Alex said, his voice firm, carrying the weight of the decision he had just made. I choose to learn from the past, not repeat it. I will wield this power, but I will not let it control me. I will not let it consume me. Talonir's eyes glowed with approval. You have chosen wisely, Alex. The sword has chosen you, but it is your heart that will guide you. And in the end, it is your heart that will shape the future of Arythos. Alex stood tall, his grip on the sword firm but steady. The final choice had been made. The journey ahead would be long, fraught with challenges and temptation. But for the first time, Alex felt at peace with the path before him. As he turned toward the temple doors, the sword gleaming brightly in his hand, he knew that his true journey had just begun. The sword was not just a tool of power, it was a symbol of hope, of redemption, and of a future yet to be written. And Alex was ready to write it.